Hello, BookTube. Welcome to Lizzie Faye Loves Books. I'm Elizabeth, and today I want to tell you about a little literary project that I've been doing, and it might be something that you've heard of people doing before. I'm sure people have done this, and it might be something you never really thought about doing, and I want to just encourage you to do it, if it's, whether it's anything you've ever thought about or not. It is centered around the book, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. I first read this book, I think in 2016. I had heard about it on BookTube, and I ran across this copy, I think at a library book sale, and so I just picked it up one day and started reading it. Now, I would say that for the most part, I did enjoy the book. There were a couple of things that my only real issues with the book, let me just get those out of the way, and then we can go on and tell you about the good things. The only real issues that I had with the book are just my own personal preferences. I don't like foul language, and there is, a few of the F-bombs in here. And also, there are a couple of instances where characters in the book, actually two different instances, two different couples, characters in the book went on a first date and then ended up in bed together. That's just something I don't understand. I don't get that. I know it happens. I just personally don't understand why anyone would do that. Okay, that's just me. Let me just get that out of the way. So that happened in this book. So I don't want you to think that this is like a completely clean book or anything like that, because if you know me, you know that that's the type of book that I really enjoy reading. Okay, all that aside, this was a great story. It was really interesting. A lot of twists and turns, a lot of definitely some morally gray characters over and above what I just talked about. And just a really interesting book to read and to discuss and to think about. So this year, I talked my local library book club into putting it on our list. Now, I don't want to confuse this book club with the mystery book club at the library that I do lead. I'm also a member of a literary book club that meets at our public library. It's been going for several years, and I attend it regularly. And I would say that the majority of the literary fiction that I read is because of that book club. I'm not a big reader of literary fiction just for the sake of literature. I much prefer to just read things that are light and fun, things that are humorous, things that make me feel good, comfy, cozy, that type of thing. So I don't read a lot of literary fiction, and when I come across some that I do enjoy, I generally want to recommend those type of books to other people. So I recommended this book to our book club, and this month, August, was the month that we discussed this book. Our library book club meets on the third Thursday of August. So since I had read it before, but it had been a couple of years, I discovered that the audio was on Hoopla, and I went ahead and borrowed it from Hoopla and decided to listen to it again. And in doing that, it reminded me how that each of the chapter headings are referring to a short story. I guess the name of that chapter is the same name as a particular short story. And at the beginning of each chapter, there's a few paragraphs by A.J. Fikry, the main character of the book, and he's writing and he's talking. I'm not going to tell you who he's writing to or anything, but he is referring back to that particular short story. And then that chapter proceeds to have some kind of link or tie-in or parallel to that short story, or so you think it does, but you don't really know unless you read all the short stories. So that is what I did. About a week before book club, went to my library website, and I started ordering the books, short story collections and books where I could find the short stories that are mentioned in this book. So here is what I have. I was able to find print copies of either short stories or collections of 11 of the 13 stories. And then later after book club, I found the two remaining ones through online sources. And so I did not get all 13 stories read in time for book club. I think I got, only one of them was a story that I had read previously, like a couple years ago, and then I read 5 more, and then I brought them all with me to book club, and between myself and another lady sitting next to me, we kind of went through each chapter and each story, and shared a little bit about each story with the book club. And a few of the book club members were familiar with 1 or 2 of the stories, but nobody had done this project. Nobody had read all of them on purpose because of A.J. Fikry or anything like that. So basically what I want to do is go through each of these stories, just tell you a tiny bit about each story, show you where I found it. I'm not going to give any spoilers for the Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, and I'm not even going to give you spoilers for the story. What I would like to do today is encourage you to do this exercise. I want to encourage you to find these stories and read them. Now, if you've never read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, I think you ought to just read it first from start to finish. Then go back and find each short story and then read it, and then go back maybe then and read that chapter and kind of figure out how it relates. We had a fun time doing it in book club. In fact, I didn't even think of all of the stuff until after book club. And then there were a few things that occurred to me later, and I was like, oh yeah, duh, that's why that was, that's why that story was referring to that chapter, things like that. So even our book club leader, who I was talking to later, she said, we might need to talk about this some more. That was really fun to have all the stories here and to, talk about it. And by the way, if any of my book club are watching this, hello to you. It was a lot of fun, chatting about this with you guys at the book club. So, the first chapter in The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry refers to Lamb to the Slaughter. Now, I will just tell you, because I don't want to give spoilers throughout the book, but in the very first chapter, we have a literary agent who is new on the job, and one of her assignments is Island Books, which is owned by A.J. Fikry, and he has the only bookstore on Alice Island, and I'm not even sure now what state it's supposed to be in. Is it Massachusetts? I can't even remember now, but anyway, so she has to ride a ferry to get there, and basically when she gets there, he is just awful to her. He doesn't even know that the person who was in her job ahead of her had passed away, and he had a fairly decent working relationship with that man at best, but he doesn't really like people. He doesn't really want to be around people. He's still grieving the death of his wife, who died just maybe a year or 2 prior, and so he's just a hard man to get along with. So the first story is written by Roald Dahl, and it is called Lamb to the Slaughter. And in the first chapter of A.J. Fikry, there is a reference to the story, Lamb to the Slaughter. And so we were kind of thinking, well, that's really, I guess that's why he picked this one. It didn't even occur to me until after book club was over that, the first chapter doesn't parallel the Lamb to the Slaughter story, which is about a lady killing her husband, and I guess I will give you a spoiler for this one. And then, she kills her husband with a leg of lamb, a frozen leg of lamb, and then sticks it in the oven and then feeds it to the policemen who are coming there to investigate. So anyway, that's the first story. That's the only one I'll tell you that I will tell you about. So the first chapter doesn't parallel the story, but the title is definitely refers back to this first chapter, because Amelia, who's the literary agent, she is like the lamb being led to the slaughter because AJ just cuts her to the quick. And so, it definitely makes sense that title, if nothing else, is a great parallel to the first chapter in A.J. Fikry. So I found Lamb to the Slaughter in this Roald Dahl omnibus, and it's quite chunky. It has, I don't even know how many stories in here, a lot. This edition is from Barnes & Noble Books, and it looks like it has several editions going from 1948 all the way up to 1974. Or maybe those stories were published in all those years. I don't know. But anyway, so you could find that story probably in some other collections as well, but in this Roald Dahl omnibus is where I found Lamb to the Slaughter. All right, so chapter 2 is called A Diamond as Big as the Ritz, and it's by F. Scott Fitzgerald from 1922. And I found this story in a very interesting book. This is called 200 Years of Great American Short Stories. It's edited by Martha Foley. This came out in 1975, and it has short stories going from 1774 to 1974, and it was published just in time for the bicentennial, and it is really fascinating. Every one of the stories in here is prefaced by a biography of that American author, and then there's the story, and there are quite a few in here that I would definitely be interested in reading. I'm not a big short story reader. Like I said earlier, I'm not really that big of a literature reader. And doing this project made me feel so educated and so literary. So if nothing else, it was a boost for me, and I feel better for having done this and explored these different authors and different short stories. So The Diamond as Big as the Ritz is about a boy at a boarding school, and he's invited to come and spend the summer with a rich friend, and his friend and family live in a mansion on a mountain that is a solid diamond. So it's a diamond as big as the Ritz, and it goes on from there. But it's a very interesting story, a little disturbing. I found that to be true of a lot of these stories. There are some that are just bizarre, some that are interesting, and a couple that just didn't go anywhere. So it's a really good mix of short stories. And there's also one other short story from A.J. Fikry that's in this book. I didn't know that when I ordered it. I just got it for the F. Scott Fitzgerald story. But there is a story by Flannery O'Connor called A Good Man is Hard to Find, and that chapter's a little farther down in A.J. Fikry. But you can get this book and knock out 2 of the stories in this one volume. And you might like to just get that book, see if your library has it, because it's really got some great American authors, a lot I've heard of, a lot I haven't, and I think it sounds like a really good book of short stories to read. Okay, so the next chapter is The Luck of the Roaring Camp by Bret Harte. It is from 1868, and I found this book at our library called The Luck of Roaring Camp and Other Stories, the best short stories of Bret Harte. So Luck of the Roaring Camp, I keep saying The Luck of Roaring Camp is the very first story, and it is basically about this really rough, I guess it's a mining camp. There's only one female there, and she's pregnant, and she dies in childbirth and leaves the baby with all of these very rough men. And, you know, they've never really been around babies, and they don't really know what to do. But that's what the story is about. So if you've read A.J. Fikry, you can kind of imagine how that fits in to the story. If you can hear thunder in the background, it has just come up a bit of a rainy thunderstorm outside. So and it's probably gotten a little darker since I've been filming. So anyway, that's what that noise is, if you can hear that in the background. All right, so the next story is What Feels Like the World by Richard Bausch. It's from 1988, and I found it in this volume called The Stories of Richard Bausch. And What Feels Like the World was about a grandfather who is, he's kind of standing alongside and watching his granddaughter prepare for a physical gymnastics type event where she's going to have to do something with a pole vault or a I don't know, she's going to have to jump over something. I can't even remember now exactly. And she's having trouble. She's really struggling with it, but she's determined to do it. She says she's the only one in her class that's having a hard time doing it, and she feels it like it's an important milestone for her to accomplish. And so this grandfather is just standing on the sidelines and just hoping and waiting and just really wanting his granddaughter to succeed. So, so that was an interesting story there. Then the next one is the one that could also be found in the 200 years of Great American Short Stories, but I found it in this book by Flannery O'Connor. It's a collection of her short stories, and it is just called O'Connor Collected Works. So the story is A Good Man is Hard to Find from 1953, and this story, I don't want to give too much away, but there's going to be a road trip. There's like a grandmother and her son and his family, and they're all going to Florida, and she's been hearing on the news that there's some escaped criminals in Florida, and she's like, I can't believe you're going to take us and your children into this, territory where there's criminals on the loose and all of that, and so it goes from there. They do go to Florida, and trouble ensues. So it's a very bizarre book. Well, not really bizarre, but it is a bit disturbing. And anyway, though, I think it's definitely worth picking up. And so that is by Flannery O'Connor. Then the next one I was able to find, not in a collection, but all on its own. And this is by Mark Twain, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. So about the time I started talking about this book, I got a frog in my throat. And then I have the celebrated jumping frog, and then at my feet I've got Bob the farting dog. So, and not only it doesn't smell too pleasant in here, I had to stop the camera so I could cough for just a minute. Anyway, this was amusing, but it didn't really go anywhere. I thought it was entertaining. I have read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and I have at least one other Mark Twain book that on my shelves that I want to read. But anyway, this was fun to read, and the country style colloquialisms that the storyteller speaks in is entertaining, and so that is the chapter heading for the next chapter, and it was written or published in 1865 by Mark Twain. All right, so the next one is called The Girls in Their Summer Dresses by Irwin Shaw, and it's from 1939. Now, I didn't think I was going to be able to find this one, and after book club was over, I started thinking, duh, I forgot to even check online. I forgot to check Hoopla and all of that, and sure enough, I found Irwin Shaw's short stories, 5 Decades, on Hoopla. I don't know if you can see that. And so I checked it out. It is a 756-page book, and when I pulled it up on Hoopla and went to the table of contents to find the short story called The Girls in Their Summer Dresses, it wasn't searchable. I could see what page it was on, but I couldn't click on it and have it skip to there. So, and it was on about, oh goodness, let me see what page. It started right in the middle of those 750 pages. So I had to just scroll through until I got to it. I'm pulling it back up here. And by the way, each of these stories, since they're short stories, they can almost all be read in one sitting easily. They're anywhere from 10 to 20 pages usually, and so that's makes it a very quick project to do. Let's see here. Well, now it's still not going to tell me. Anyway, it was somewhere in around the 300 to 400 page mark in this book, so it took me a little while to get to it. But the story was about a man and woman walking along, and the man just can't keep his eyes off of other women, and so it's their discussion about that, and the fact that he does it, and why he does it, and that type of thing. So that's what that story is about. Then the next story, I wasn't able to find the actual story. It is by Grace Paley from 1972 called A Conversation with My Father. My library didn't have anything by Grace Paley in print, and on Hoopla, I couldn't find the actual story collection that it's in. I did read about it, but what I did find was a study guide, a study guide for Grace Paley's conversation with my father, and it was 19 pages, and it basically told everything I would need to know about the story. So I really feel like I've read the story, even though I haven't. I got a summary of it, an analysis, a discussion of the characters, and the author notes, and you know, all that kind of thing. Now, if you want to find the story itself, let me see if I can get you the title. It is about a dying father who's, and here's what that's what the book looks like. It is about a dying father and his daughter, who is a writer, and he is requesting that she write a certain type of story. And he talks about a couple of authors. He said, you know, write a story like they write. And when she writes it and she talks about the story, he's not happy with it. He's like, no, that's not what I meant. I want you to do this. Well, she wants to do it her way. You know, she's a different generation, and he wants it done a different way. And so they kind of argue about how a proper story should be written. It says that this short story, A Conversation with My Father, was originally published in the New American Review in 1972, and then it was subsequently included in Paley's second collection of short stories called Enormous Changes at the Last Minute, which was published in 1974. So if you want to actually find that story, that's where you need to go. I may still see if I can get that book on interlibrary loan, because now that I've done this whole project, I won't really feel like it's completely complete until I've actually read that story. But I've read enough about it now that I wanted to go ahead and do this video and chat about it so that I can get all these books back to the library. Okay. So then the next one was also kind of bizarre, and when you hear the author, you will probably understand. It is called A Perfect Day for Bananafish from 1948, and it's by J.D. Salinger. Now, I have never read, oh goodness, I can't even say, what's his most famous book? The Catcher in the Rye. I don't know. I have it on my TBR, but I just can't ever seem to make myself read it. I just have a feeling I'm going to hate it. And so I've never picked it up. Well, actually, I have picked it up, and then I still couldn't make myself read it. Anyway, I found this from our library, 9 stories by J.D. Salinger, and it does include A Perfect Day for Bananafish. It's kind of in 2 parts. The first part is a young woman, and she's on a trip, either, I guess he's with her husband, maybe they're newlyweds, I'm not sure. But she's in the hotel room, and she's talking to her mother, and you just hear her side of the conversation, and you hear, you can hear that her mother is concerned for the mental health of the gentleman. And she's trying to reassure her mother that, you know, he's fine, and that he's out on the beach. And so then it moves out to the beach, and he's there, and he's having a conversation with a little girl, and it goes from there. I'm not going to tell you how it ends. It is a bit disturbing, maybe not in the way I made it just sound. You know, there's not any there's no molestation or anything like that. But anyway, it's interesting. I don't know if I'll ever read anything else by J.D. Salinger or not, but now at least I can say that I read at least this one thing. Then the next one is The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. This is the only short story that I had read before. I haven't read a lot of Poe, but I did find it again and reread it in this edition, really nice edition, Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe that my library had. Telltale Heart basically is a conscience story. Someone has done something wrong, or they do something wrong in the book, and the Telltale Heart is kind of an illustration, I think, of their conscience just not letting it go. And so that's interesting. Then the next one is called Ironhead, and it is by Amy Bender. I tell you, I found this little volume called Willful Creatures, and it's got a few short stories by Amy Bender. I don't think Amy Bender is an author that I will ever pursue reading anymore, because before I could even get to the short story that I needed to read, which is called Ironhead, I flipped through the book, and there is one story, and the title of it is Mother F-er, and it... just for the sake of pure curiosity, after I read Ironhead, I went back to it and I thought, okay, what could she possibly write that has this title? It is literally she took the literal definition of that compound word, and she wrote this story about this man who only has sex with mothers, not married mothers, single mothers, because he doesn't want to break up marriages or anything like that. And it's just bizarre. And because I just despise the F word to begin with, you know, I don't know. It's just way out there. Anyway, but Ironhead, the story called Ironhead, is also very bizarre. Probably the most bizarre of all of these. It's about parents who are pumpkinheads, and they have other children who are pumpkinheads, and the mother gives birth to their youngest child, and he has the head of an iron, like an iron that you iron clothes with the plastic handle and all that. And when he cries, you know, he lets out steam and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of meant to be a story about people being different, and it's kind of tragic as well. So, you know, it's definitely worth picking up if you want to read something that's definitely bizarre. But anyway, it is in this collection called Willful Creatures by Amy Bender. And so almost getting to the end now. The next one is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, and it's by Raymond Carver from 1980. I found it in this Carver Collected Stories, very similar to this O'Connor edition of short stories. And this story didn't really go anywhere. It was about these two couples, and they were sitting around socializing and drinking, and they started talking about love and relationships, and it was just basically them getting drunker as they went, and just talking, and a lot of it didn't make a lot of sense. So anyway, that was that story. And then one more. I think I'm almost done. Yes. The last one I think was my favorite, and I just finally got this read. I did read these basically in order. This is called The Bookseller by Roald Dahl. So interestingly enough, Roald Dahl is the only author that has two stories that are referred to in this book, and it's the first one and the last one. So the notes that A.J. Fikry, the book character, writes about this was that this story was mediocre, but he liked it because he related to the characters, because he's a bookseller. I didn't think it was mediocre. I thought it was really a good story. It is basically about a man who owns a used rare bookstore, and he's got a secretary who is also his lover, and they sit in the back room all day, and they don't really care about what's going on out in the bookstore. If somebody wants to buy a book, they come to the back room and they pay for it, and then they go, because the bookstore is really a front for a much more lucrative business that him and his assistant have going on in the back room. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I thought it was a great book. I mean, I don't condone what they're doing by any means, but it was so much fun to read, and I just enjoyed it. It was just a great little story, and it's called The Bookseller by Roald Dahl. So, of course, it was not in the same volume. It was not in the omnibus, so I had to get two big fat books by Roald Dahl to get both the stories. But this edition is just called Roald Dahl Collected Stories, and this particular edition is from Everyman's Library. And I'm assuming that that's Roald Dahl there on the golf course. Maybe. I don't know. It might not be. It might just be a man. I don't really know what he looks like. But this is a very, very chunky book filled with lots of stories. And the bookseller is right at the end. It's like the next to the last story. I just thought it was a lot of fun. So that was my A.J. Fikry story project. I thought it was a lot of fun. And like I said, I feel so much more educated having read these. You know, I'm sure I had to read some short stories in school, but I don't remember what any of those were. That was a long time ago. And this was just a fun project. I want to encourage you to do it. That's why I didn't give a lot of spoilers. I didn't really want to spoil the book if you haven't read it, and I didn't want to spoil the short stories. I want you to have the fun experience of finding them and reading the stories, and then looking back and seeing how they relate to the chapters in The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. Have you ever done this project? I know that a few people have, because when I was looking at some of these stories on Goodreads, I read some reviews that said, you know, some comments, and people were saying, yeah, I just found this story because it's in A.J. Fikry, and I was reading all the stories, and, you know, so forth and so on. So anyway, that's all I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if there are any other types of projects that you've heard about people doing that you think are fun adventures, fun adventures in literature that you would recommend. Otherwise, I hope you will give this a try and let me know if you end up doing it. So that's all for this video. I hope you are having a great day. Read a good book, and God bless you.